This is a recording of the book Today You Will, read by the author, Ian Rasmussen. Introduction to Today You Will. Before you begin, most of us do not intend to drift. We intend to grow. We intend to improve. We intend to change the things we know are not working. And yet somehow, intention alone rarely carries us where we hope to go. Life becomes busy, responsibilities multiply, disappointments leave marks, time moves faster than we expect, and gradually, almost quietly, we learn how to live without pursuing what we once desired. This book is not written for people who lack desire. It is written for people who feel it and have delayed responding to it. If you are holding this book, chances are there is time to consider what's ahead. What have you wanted? What have you that is unfinished, unresolved, not broken beyond repair, just not where you hoped it would be by now? You may not be able to name it precisely, but you feel it. A conversation you've avoided, a habit you've learned to tolerate, a calling you once felt clearly, and now you keep it at arm's length. A version of yourself you believed you would become eventually. This book does not ask you to change everything. It does not demand dramatic promises. It does not shame delay. Instead, it asks something gentler and far more honest. What will you do with the day you have been given today? The pages ahead begin with a story, not advice. A story about a man who waited too long, a man who made choices that narrowed his future, a man who believed change had passed him by, or so he thought. His name is Ezra. You will meet him not at the beginning of his life, but near the end, at a moment when time feels painfully limited and clarity arrives too late. Or so it seems. Ezra's story is not meant to frighten you. It is meant to help you pause, to reflect, to recognize yourself without condemnation. Because whether our circumstances are dramatic or ordinary, most change is delayed for the same reason. We believe we still have time to prepare, time to feel ready. But life does not always wait for our timing to be right. It waits for our honesty. And sometimes the most important work begins not when we feel prepared, but when we finally stop postponing what we already know matters. You do not need to read this book quickly. You do not need to agree with everything you encounter. You do not need to make promises as you begin. All that is asked of you is to be present, to read slowly, to notice what resonates, to pay attention to the places where something stirs within you when you quietly say, "This is for me." Because those moments, the subtle ones, are often invitations. The story you are about to read leads into principles, not prescriptions, into reflection, not formulas, into movement that happens one choice at a time. And these principles are not meant to be mastered once and left behind. They are meant to accompany you. You may find yourself coming back to a single chapter, a single idea, a single pledge, allowing its words to steady you again. This book is meant to be a companion, not a checklist. It ends not with a command, but with a reminder that today is not insignificant, that today is not wasted, that today still holds possibility. You do not have to know every detail for the journey that lies ahead. You only need to be willing to honor the day you have been already given. Ezra's story begins now. Before it does, take a moment, breathe, notice where you are. This book is not focused on changing your life all at once. It's asking you to consider what might happen if you stopped waiting, and allowed today to matter. Today you will. Chapter 1, The Cell and the Light. A pale light trembled upon the wall. It came not from the sun itself, but from some distant opening above the wall, a narrow slit through which the morning fought its way into the cold cell. The light crept across the rough floor like a living thing, touching chains, a drinking bowl, and the torn edge of a prisoner's sleeve. Then it reached Ezra's face. He did not move at first. Sleep had not truly claimed him during the night, only a kind of waiting, an uneasy drift between memory and dread. He opened his eyes to the same shadows he had closed them to and wondered, is this the day? Somewhere beyond the walls, water dripped steadily, like an anxious patient's heartbeat in the silence. From the corridor came the low scrape of a guard's footsteps, then quiet again. Ezra listened to it all, afraid even of the sound of his own breath. Across from him, Malik lay curled against the far wall, his back to the light. Ezra couldn't tell by the rhythm of the man's breathing that he still slept. The chains between them rattled slowly whenever Malik shifted. Ezra stared at the iron links that joined them and thought how strange it was to be bound in this way to the very man who had led him here. He turned his face to the wall and closed his eyes, but the images would not rest. The dark alley, sudden lights, shouting, the impact that drove him to the ground, the trial, the sentence, the laughter. A tremor passed through him. He pressed his palms to his face and whispered, God, if you still hear me. But no words followed. What could he ask for? A miracle? A delay? Forgiveness? Forgiveness was for the righteous, not for someone like him. The light on the floor grew stronger. Ezra watched it climb the wall, saw the color of the day seep into the cell. Morning was coming, and with it, whatever awaited him today. He had seen the preparations the day before, the gathering of the guards, the talk of a special execution, and the statement that certain prisoners would pay for their debts come sunrise. But none of the prisoners were told who would be taken or when. That ignorance was its own kind of torture. He rubbed his wrists where the iron had worn the skin raw and thought of the sun beyond the walls, of the people waking in the upper streets, washing their hands, calling to one another. Somewhere above, he could hear the muffled sounds of the city, merchants raising their shutters, women grinding grain, and the faint cry of a rooster. The world still goes on, he thought bitterly, even when a man's world ends. He drew his knees to his chest and tried to remember another morning, one from long ago, when the air smelled of bread instead of iron. Chapter 2, The Days of Youth. He was 12 again, running through the narrow alleys of his village near Jericho, his dusty feet, his heart alive. His mother's voice echoed behind him, calling him back for morning prayers. He had been late again, distracted by the stonecutter's shop and the sound of hammer on chisel. The craftsman had smiled at the boy's curiosity and said, You have hands made for shaping, not stealing. He remembered laughing then, promising that one day he would build something that lasted. But that was before he met Malik. Malik had come into his life like a storm. He was older by a few years, sharper in tongue and quicker in confidence. Ezra had admired him instantly, his way of speaking, his boldness, the way others seemed to listen when he entered a room. Malik taught him small things at first, how to talk a merchant down, how to slip a coin unnoticed from a crowded table, how to laugh when caught so people thought it was all a jest. Ezra had hesitated the first time, but Malik's laughter was infectious, his charm irresistible. Why should the rich have everything? Malik would say. We only take what they don't miss. And Ezra, foolish in youth, had believed him. One night under the stars, they spoke of dreams. Ezra had confessed he wanted to see Jerusalem, the great city of their fathers, and stand in the temple courts. Malik had smiled in a secret way of his and said, Then come with me. There's more to see than priests and prayers. The memory shifted like smoke, years passing in the span of a breath. The markets of Jerusalem, the taverns, the deals made in shadows. Ezra's skill had grown, but his peace had not. With each theft came a smaller portion of laughter and a heavier burden on his conscience. He had thought of leaving Malik more than once, but there was always another promise, another plan, another chance to make it big. And beneath it all, the strange loyalty of shared sins, two men too deep in their own lies to walk apart. Then came the night it all ended. The failed robbery, the soldiers' torches, the running through the alleys slick with rain. Malik had fallen, and Ezra had turned back to help him, only to be seized by the guards as Malik fled. But Malik had been caught too later that same night. And when the soldiers demanded names, Malik had spoken Ezra's first. Chapter 3, The Longest Morning. Ezra was stirred from the memory by a bitter laugh. Ezra, you praying? Malik muttered, keeps me awake. Ezra said nothing. Malik stretched, the chains clinking softly. Oh, friend, you worry too much. Maybe it isn't us today. Ezra met his gaze. And if it is? Malik shrugged. Then we'll face it like men. It's only pain. It ends soon enough. He turned away again, yawning, as though the matter were settled. Ezra watched him in disbelief. The calmness, the arrogance that had once drawn him in, now repulsed him. He sank to the floor, his back to the wall. Even now, chained to the same wall, Malik appeared to slip back into sleep, as though guilt were only a burden for the weak. How can he take this so lightly? Ezra envied him and hated himself for envying him. Time passed. The cell grew warmer. The light on the wall shifted from gold to white. And somewhere above came a sudden sound. Trumpets, faint but clear. Then shouts. Ezra looked up, straining to hear. The voices were too distant to make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Excitement, urgency. Another festival crowd, Malik murmured. They celebrate while we rot. Ezra thought of the soldiers or the stories told by his mother describing the pilgrims arriving from every corner of Judea, bringing their lambs for sacrifice, singing the old songs of deliverance. Passover, he realized, the day of remembering how God had set their fathers free. The irony struck him hard. Freedom, while I wait to die. He closed his eyes and whispered, Mother, I hope you don't see me now. Her face rose before him, clear as the day she had spoken the words of belief in him. Chapter 4, The Making of a Thief. The memory came to him not as a single picture, but as a weight. It pressed upon his chest the way guilt presses on a man who's learned to live without calling it by its name. Ezra saw himself, younger, yet already tired. He was standing outside his mother's doorway, listening to her hum a psalm while she mended an old cloak by candlelight. She had always been the one who believed he could be better. You have your father's eyes, she used to say. And if you ever learn to see with your heart, those eyes will lead you well. But Ezra had not come to listen that night. He had come to avoid her eyes. He slipped past her quickly and carefully exited through the narrow doorway, his purse heavy with coins that were not his. Inside a nearby tavern, Malik waited. seated in the shadowed corner of the room, laughing as he counted their latest take. See, brother, Malik grinned, they won't miss it. The wealthy never do. Ezra didn't laugh, not at first. He stared at the coins as though they might accuse him. But Malik's voice was a soothing poison. You worry too much. You think they ever worried about us when we were hungry? Look around. This is how the world works. The strong take, the weak get taken. Ezra tried to answer, but his throat closed. He wanted to say that his mother prayed differently. Instead, he swallowed hard and said, maybe you're right. And with those words, something inside him shifted. The days that followed blurred together, a slow slide from unease into numbness. The thefts grew bolder, the justifications came quicker. Each new wrong required a smaller lie to cover the last. He began to avoid his brother Eli, who had once been his closest friend. Eli tried to talk sense into him one evening. Ezra, this isn't who you are. You don't have to keep doing this. Ezra wanted so desperately to confess right there, to say, I don't know how to stop. But pride rode like a shield. What do you know of it? He snapped. You live by rules written for other men, men who never had to fight for bread. Eli looked at him a long moment and said quietly, no, brother, I live by rules that keep me from becoming the kind of man who forgets who he is. That sentence haunted Ezra for years. But then he had only scoffed, pretending it didn't matter. He turned away and found comfort in the only voice that didn't make him feel small, Malik's. Malik became the echo Ezra chose to believe. Whenever his conscience stirred, Malik drowned it out. Ezra started to measure worth by cunning. He stole not only from strangers, but from those who trusted him, a merchant who had given him work, a neighbor who had loaned him bread. And when his mother's eyes, soft and sorrowful, asked if he was all right, he lied to her too. Each lie built another wall. Each excuse laid another stone in the prison of his own making, until one day, Ezra could no longer feel the shame. He felt only the dull safety of not caring. Chapter 5, The Footsteps. The sound of boots broke the silence, heavy, deliberate. The corridor filled with echoes. Malik sat up. Ezra felt his stomach turn cold. The key scraped in the lock. The door creaked open. A guard entered, and the tall one with the scar across his face. Up, he barked at Malik. You're coming with us. Malik smirked. Both of us? The guard's eyes were flat. Both. Chains rattled. Hands grasped. Ezra stumbled as they pulled him to his feet. The sunlight in the corridor blinded him after the long darkness. They were led through the passage that climbed towards daylight, the air growing fresher, the sounds of the city swelling. Ezra blinked as they emerged into the courtyard. The scent of dust and olive wood filled his lungs. Soldiers were assembling there, several of them, armed and ready. And beyond the gate, a crowd waited. The murmuring of hundreds of voices, the restless movement of people shifting for a better view. Ezra's breath caught. So it is today. Beside him, Malik gave a low whistle. Whew, quite an audience, he said. Ezra said nothing. His gaze had fixed upon something else. A third man standing nearby, flanked by guards. His face was bruised, his robe torn, a crown of thorns pressed cruelly upon his head. Yet there was something in the man's bearing, a strange calm, a quiet dignity that made the noise of the crowd seem distant and unreal. The man turned slightly, and for a moment their eyes met. Ezra felt as though the world itself had gone still. There was no accusation in those eyes, no hatred, not even pity, only a depth that seemed to see through him, past the chains, past the guilt, to something he had forgotten existed. And in a single moment, without knowing why, Ezra felt both fear and hope rise within him together, twin flames in a darkness of his soul. The guards shouted, the beams were lifted, the procession began. And as they led him through the gates into the blinding morning, Ezra whispered the same words that had haunted his dreams through the night. How did I come to this? Chapter 6, The Road. The air outside struck Ezra like a wave. It was warm already, and heavy with the mingled smells of dust, sweat, and the smoke from the city's morning fires. After the dim chill of the cell, the light felt almost violent. He blinked hard, struggling to adjust as the guards pushed them forward into the street. The noise was staggering. Vendors shouted. Children darted through the crowd. The murmur of hundreds of voices rolled like surf against the narrow walls of the lane. But beneath the ordinary sounds of the city pulsed something different today, an undercurrent of excitement, almost celebration. People pressed in from both sides as the soldiers marched the three prisoners forward. Ezra could feel their eyes on him, some curious, some disgusted, others strangely eager, as though they'd been waiting for this spectacle all morning. He wanted to shout that they were wrong about him, that he was not what they thought. But what would it change? The rope around his chest, the beam around his shoulders, the weight of his own guilt, those were the truest things he carried. Malik walked just ahead of him, laughing low under his breath. Look at them, he said. They act like they'd never seen a condemned man before. Ezra didn't answer. His gaze had turned towards the third prisoner. The man walked between them, silent. His body swayed under the burden of the rough-hewn beam the soldiers had placed across his back, yet his steps were steady. The blood from the thorns on his forehead had dried into dark streaks along his cheeks, and the sunlight caught in them like iron. His robe was little more than a torn strip of linen, clinging to skin marked by lashes. And yet, there was no anger in him, no pleading, no defiance, only a strange composure, as though the suffering itself had become a path he had already chosen. Ezra could not stop watching him. Every now and then the man would stumble. The soldiers would shout, striking him with their rods. Each time he would fall to his knees, catch his breath, and rise again without a word. At one such fall, Ezra heard himself whisper, let him rest. The guard swung his staff towards him. You'll speak when spoken to, thief. The wood caught Ezra in the ribs, and he staggered, gasping. Malik laughed again. Careful, Ezra. You'll draw their kindness away from me. But the man in the middle turned at the sound of the blow. Their eyes met once more. For an instant, Ezra felt the same disarming calm as in the courtyard, an understanding deeper than pity. The man said nothing, yet something in that gaze felt like forgiveness itself. Ezra dropped his eyes and walked on, ashamed without knowing why. Chapter 7, The Street of Olive Sellers. The procession wound through the narrow streets, climbing gradually towards the western gate. At each corner, more people joined the stream. Some jeered, some spat. Others whispered one another in tones too low for Ezra to hear. A group of women stood near the doorway, their faces veiled. One of them reached out as the silent man passed. Her hand brushed his arm, trembling. Ezra saw her lips move, but her words were swallowed by the noise. The man looked at her and nodded once, slowly, almost tenderly, as she wept aloud. Ezra could not understand it. Why should a stranger's sorrow pierce him more deeply than the rod? Why did the world seem to tilt around this man, as though every sound and shadow bent toward him? He tried to shake the feeling. He was a fool to think of anything but survival, And yet, in the chaos of the crowd, he found himself studying the man's back, the rhythmic rise and fall of his shoulders beneath the beam. There was something familiar there, though he could not place it, something that stirred the memory of prayers he had long forgotten. Chapter 8: The Turning. As they neared the gates, the city streets widened, and the city's hum gave way to the open air. The wind carried the smell of dry grass and distant stone. Ahead lay a hill, barren and sharp against the pale sky. Ezra felt his knees weaken. He knew now where they were being taken. He had seen the place once before from afar, the place of public execution outside the city walls, the place the soldiers called the skull. His stomach turned. He glanced at Malik, whose grin had finally faded. This is it, Malik muttered. So much for your prayers. Ezra said nothing. His mouth had gone dry. The heat pressed down like a weight. The guards shouted again, ordering them to quicken their pace. Ezra stumbled forward, the wood digging into his shoulders. His breath came in ragged bursts. All around him, the crowd surged, their voices rising, mockery, laughter, curses. Somewhere in the din, he heard a single cry, clear and pleading. Let him go! He has done nothing wrong. Ezra turned his head towards the voice, but the soldiers pushed him onward. The man in the middle fell again. This time, he did not rise immediately. The beam slipped from his back and struck the stones with a hollow sound. The soldiers cursed and struck him, but he did not move. Ezra watched, horror growing in his chest. Blood streamed down the man's side. His hands trembled weakly against the ground. A stranger stepped out from the crowd, broad shoulders, dark skinned, a foreigner by his dress. The soldiers seized him, forcing him to lift the fallen beam. The man obeyed, bewildered but silent. He bore the weight and followed beside the prisoner, carrying what the other could no longer carry. Ezra's throat tightened. Who is he? He wondered. What kind of man commands such mercy from strangers? He resumed the climb. Chapter 9: The Hill. The hill rose steep and gray, stripped of trees. The wind was stronger here, whipping the dust into small spirals. From its crest, the city spread out below them, glittering in the sun. Ezra's legs trembled with exhaustion. Each step felt heavier than the last. Then they reached the tops. The guards shouted for them to halt. And then Ezra saw the posts, 3 of them, rough beams already set in the ground, their shadows stretching long and thin across the earth. At their bases lay the tools, hammers, nails, ropes. The sound escaped him, half gasp, half moan. He had heard the stories, but seeing it now turned his stomach to stone. Beside him, Malik cursed under his breath. So this is how it ends. Ezra looked again at the silent man. He stood between them still, head bowed, face streaked with blood and dust. Yet even now there was no fear in him, only weariness and something else Ezra could not name. The soldiers began their grim work. Ezra heard the clang of metal, the barked orders. 2 guards approached him, seizing his arms. He fought instinctively, twisting, shouting, Please don't! But over his cries rose another voice, soft, low, like a breath carried on the wind. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Ezra froze. The words hung in the air, too calm, too steady to belong in such a place. He turned his head. The man was looking upwards, his lips barely moving. His voice trembled not with fear, but with compassion, as though he pitied the very ones who tortured him. Ezra stared, breathless. Something broke inside him, some hard, cold place he had kept sealed for years. Chapter 10, The Cross. The sky darkened slightly, as if the cloud had passed before the sun. Ezra felt his wrists bound, the rope burning his skin. The hammer's first blow sent fire through his arm, and he cried out. When they lifted the beams, he heard the crowd again, their mocking laughter, their cruel jokes. Some hurled taunts. Save yourself, chosen one. But beneath it all, there was a sound like weeping, a woman's voice. Ezra forced his eyes open and turned his head towards the man in the center. The cross stood higher than the others, silhouetted against the white blaze of noon. The man hung there, his head bowed, his body trembling. A few women knelt at his feet, and among them a young man stood, his face streaked with tears. Malak, on Ezra's other side, murmured curses between gasps of pain. If you are so holy, he spat towards the center, then save yourself and us. He then encouraged Ezra to join his mockery. Instinctively, Ezra was about to comply, but the inner voice, which he had suppressed so many times before when directed by Malak, just spoke. Enough, Malak. Stop. The words pierced the air like light through darkness. Ezra felt them reverberate deep within him, past fear, past agony, past all the guilt that weighed his soul for years. Then Ezra's eyes met the eyes of the man on the center cross. There was no condemnation there, no triumph, only peace. And in that peace, Ezra had hope. This was no ordinary prisoner, no thief, no rebel, no madman. This was the one the prophets had spoken of, the one his mother had prayed to. Tears began to blur his vision. His breath came in shallow gasps. He whispered, barely audible, remember me when you come into your kingdom. For a moment, the world felt utterly silent. Then the answer came, gentle, certain, eternal. Truly, you will be with me in paradise. Ezra's eyes closed. The pain did not vanish, but it no longer owned him. He felt the weight of the world lift, replaced by something vast and quiet. The wind rose. It was cool against his face. Somewhere far below, the city's noise faded into stillness. And in that stillness, Ezra, once a thief, now forgiven, finally understood what it meant to live, even as he died. The end. Today you will transition page for part 2 of the book. Transition page. Ezra's story into your story. You have just walked with Ezra through the final hours of his life, and I am honored you stayed with him until the end. His story lingers because, whether you admit it aloud or not, it is our story. I know this because it has been my story too. Every one of us carries places where we shine and places where we stumble. Being human means living somewhere between what we are and what we long to become. We often find ourselves like Ezra, hesitating on the threshold of change. We ache for more, yet we delay. We imagine a different life, but we do not step toward it. We doubt our ability. We justify our inaction. We hide instead of asking for help. I know this pattern well. I lived it while writing this book. Ezra's story was placed on my heart years ago, and though the message felt urgent, I avoided it. I thought about it constantly, but I did not act. I kept believing one day would be the right time, and I postponed what mattered most again and again. Then my life changed in a way I could never have predicted. My son, Ian, was diagnosed with stage 4 renal medullary carcinoma. an aggressive cancer primarily found in young people with the sickle cell trait. It is rare, brutal, and notoriously resistant to treatment. When we asked the doctor what we should expect, he told us that most people who face this diagnosis do not survive. His words proved devastatingly true. Ian's battle ended in 6 months. That chapter of this book, his chapter, will come at the end. It is where I will honor him and share the lessons he taught us, including the one that now sits in the very center of this book, the importance of today. After hearing his diagnosis, Ian chose to live with fierce simplicity, one day at a time. He understood, in a way many of us never do, that today is the only day anyone truly receives. Today is the gift. Today is the chance. Today is the moment with weight. So I urge you, gently but earnestly, to consider the preciousness of the day you have been given right now, not tomorrow's hypothetical hours, not the fantasy of a better season, today. See yourself in Ezra's hesitation. See yourself in the places you put off improvement. See yourself in the longing that will not quiet, and then listen closely to the same words Jesus spoke to Ezra. Today you will, not later, not eventually, not when it is convenient or comfortable. Today. To help you live into that promise, the next 5 chapters introduce the framework that will guide you towards your preferred future. In the story, Ezra had only one today left. You and I, at least for now, are still being given more. These 5 principles are designed to help you honor each day with intention, humility, and courage. They follow the letters of the word today. T, tell yourself what you want. O, own the outcomes. D, design a life plan. A, acknowledge the gaps. Y, you are the investment. These principles are not meant to be mastered once and left behind. They are meant to accompany you because every today brings different questions, different challenges, and different opportunities for growth. For now, let's walk into these principles together and make the most of the day you have right now. Today you will. For the purposes of this recording, I will simply note that this is the point of the book that moves into the 5 principles of today. Each principle will end with a pledge that the reader can have as a tool to be read over them, or words in which they can then take and believe and begin to live their life in accordance with the principle. After the 5 chapters on the Today principles, I move into the following final chapter. For purposes of this recording, I will allow you to read the principles, and instead we'll simply move directly into this final chapter. And it reads as follows. Final chapter, the gift of today, lessons from Ian. As I mentioned in the transition from part 1 into part 2 of this book, I want to honor my son Ian in this final chapter. The 26 years of his life provide more than fond memories. He has left us with so much more. There are moments in life when truth does not arrive through explanation. It arrives through presence. My son Ian taught us that. Not through speeches, not through arguments, not through answers offered too quickly. He taught us through how he lived, how he faced the final days he was given, the way he lived. Ian did not wait on improvement. He approached life with intention, seeking growth, learning, responsibility, and forward movement. He believed life was to be engaged, not postponed. When something needed attention, he faced it. When something needed growth, he pursued it. He did not live passively, he lived deliberately, and that posture never left him, not even at the end. What Ian taught us about today. Late on a Friday evening, we brought Ian home from the hospital. His medical team told us he had only days left. Home hospice care was arranged, and our family gathered around him. On Saturday, hospice workers explained what the final physical signs would look like as his body began to shut down. Later that day, my wife and I, along with our other children, spoke privately with Ian about arrangements, cremation, funeral services, and things no parent ever wants to discuss with their child. The conversation was honest, and it was heavy. That afternoon, our pastor came to the house. By then, more family had arrived: grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, nieces, nephews, filling the room where Ian rested. Before the pastor arrived, I told him something had shifted in us. During the 6 months of Ian's battle with cancer, we had prayed for healing. Now we felt called to stand near the finish line of Ian's race, not pleading for delay, but cheering him towards victory. We knew where Ian's trust rested. During his conversation with Ian, our pastor spoke gently. He told Ian that a marathon is 26 miles long. He shared that he had run several himself, and that every race includes moments of pain, doubt, and exhaustion, moments when quitting feels easier than continuing. But then he described the finish line. He talked about crossing it, the joy, the release, the celebration. And then he said, Ian, maybe your life is like a 26-year marathon. You've run through some very difficult miles. But let me ask you the most important question I can ask today. If today were your last, how confident are you on a scale of 1 to 100 that you would cross the finish line of life and go to heaven? Ian did not hesitate. 98%. The pastor smiled and asked why. Ian answered simply, I believe the Bible is true. I believe that Jesus did everything for me. There's nothing more I need to do to be right with God. Then he paused and added, but isn't there always that 2% doubt? The pastor looked at him and said, I think you can move it up to 100. There was no debate, no correction needed, just clarity. Peace before pain. After that, the pastor asked one more question. Ian, what would you like me to pray for? Ian's answer came quietly but firmly. Pray for peace. I don't want people questioning God. I don't want people asking why. I know God is good, and I know I'm good with God. That request changed everything. We had not yet faced the moment that would hurt the most. Ian had not yet taken his final breath, and we all knew that when that moment came, we would face a choice, not about faith, about posture. Would we be bitter or better? Ian had already told us what he wanted: peace, trust, no questioning of God's goodness. He was telling us, before the pain arrived, how he hoped we would carry it. The choice between bitter and better. Ian's request for peace led us directly into a conversation about choice. Everyone who loved him would soon face a crossroads we never asked for, the same crossroads life eventually brings all of us. Will this loss make us bitter, or will it make us better? Bitterness is quiet, but relentless. It waits in the shadows, offering the illusion of protection. while slowly stealing the life it promises to defend. Better is harder at first. It requires hope. It requires trust when nothing makes sense. Ezra and Malik stood on the opposite sides of that same choice. One continued to mock, one surrendered, one clung to bitterness, one reached for better and found eternity waiting for him. Ian's life brought that same decision to our doorstep. And like Ezra, we discovered that even in sorrow, there is a path towards goodness, growth, and profound transformation. No parent wants to become better through loss, but we could honor Ian by choosing the life he wanted for us, a life marked by joy, trust, perseverance, and gratitude for each today we are given. Why this book exists. Ezra's story is not simply a parable. It is a mirror. It reflects every person who has ever paused long enough to wonder whether change is possible, whether growth can still happen, whether the future can still be shaped differently from the past. For some, hope may feel distant. For others, the weight of what has already been lived may feel heavier than the future they long for. And Ian's story is the heartbeat. It makes the message personal. He taught us in fewer days than we expected that the power of today is not poetic. It is practical. It is urgent. It is sacred. We do not need a perfect history to choose a better tomorrow. We do not need certainty to take the next step. We do not need a lifetime to make your life meaningful. You only need today. This book exists because Ian reminded us of that truth in a way that we could never ignore. His life called us to attention. It asked us to be present. It asked us to be grateful. It asked us to be brave. It asked us in a way, each in our own way, to rise. Your life will be measured in today's. Your life will not be measured in decades, not in accomplishments, not in titles or achievements. It will be measured in the quiet accumulation of choices made one day at a time. Ezra understood this on the cross. Ian embodied it in his life. And now the invitation is handed to you. What will you do with the today that you have been given? Will you drift towards what is familiar or rise towards the life you were created to live? Will you cling to bitterness or choose better? The better that heals, the better that grows, the better that honors the people and purposes entrusted to you. You can claim the direction you desire. You can begin the journey now, not someday, not tomorrow, in this moment, in this today. That is the quiet promise woven through this book, through Ezra's story, and through Ian's life. Today, you will.